Hi, my name is Drew Davison, and I've had the privilege of working with a committee of fine arts teachers across the state of Tennessee for the past 3 or 4 years. And the purpose of today's video is to give everybody a really succinct and short look at the new Tennessee Fine Arts Portfolio model, so you can begin teaching and doing some strategic planning throughout the year and kind of cut down on any kind of confusion or extra work that might be involved. So we're going to just start going through a few slides and hopefully do it in a way that values your time, because I know that everybody's very busy and doesn't have any time to do a lot of extra work. So let's jump right in. A little bit about this system is that fine arts teachers designed this to do it in a way that's flexible, that gives teachers a lot of choice, but it's also rigorous, knowing that at the end of the process, those people that are really knocking it out of the park in the arts and arts education are really identified. And we're also going to look at, see if we can support those that perhaps don't do so well in this model. This model combines the concept of evaluation and professional growth, which I think is really important. But most important, it's really good to keep in mind that this process was developed by arts teachers: music, band, choir, visual art, drama, theater, dance, media arts. Teachers were involved from the very beginning and drove this work. So we're really proud of that. And also, we want to think about how this model is important because it's the students that we actually reach and the ones that we teach and grow in the arts, and it doesn't put our fate in the hands of those teachers who are given the standardized test, the school-wide value-added model, and so we're taking kind of control of our own destiny in order to get our evaluation. So arts teachers should be commended for coming up with that idea. This also creates additional career pathways and opportunities for teachers, because you'll find later that the system relies on arts teachers to be the actual evaluators. There's no policymakers, supervisors, higher ed community. Those are all very important people, but not when we're starting to look at the levels of student growth in the portfolios. That's only done by arts teachers, content-specific trained teachers. So, and then finally, before we jump in, it's important to note that this process gives us the language to kind of start speaking with policymakers and principals about a well-rounded education that includes the arts. Instead of just focusing on the tested subjects, that we have a better way to look at a school and school growth, and that has to do with equipping kids with knowledge and skills in the arts to make them truly successful with college and career and life readiness. So with all those things in mind, I want to make sure that in this slide we talk about exactly what we're talking about with the Fine Arts Growth Measures model, which has to do with this portion over here, which is currently held a lot of places through the state as the value-added standardized test. Now in the arts, now we are a tested subject. We just do that on our own terms. But exactly, that is what we're talking about, the portion that's the growth measure, not the qualitative side that the principals do that observation. That's separate. That still continues. This part takes the place of standardized tests for our subject areas or the standardized tests of other content areas. So what is the process? Very basically, you're going to provide context. You individualize the portfolio to meet your own needs throughout the year. This is not a one-size-fits-all. This is not a cookie-cutter approach. Every teacher is unique. Every teaching situation is unique, and this system allows you to customize for yourself. So you will get into the online system. You'll create a profile that communicates to the peer reviewers exactly about your teaching situation, the amount of time that you have with your students, a little bit about your coursework. And after that's established, you're going to plan your lessons like you always have and collect evidence that students are growing. This evidence is then uploaded online, where it will be peer evaluated in a very blind, non-partial way. And that's essentially the overall process. Now let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into each one of those components. Like I said, you create your online portfolio. That's step one. That information that you submit about the time that you put in, that the time that you receive with students, the different courses that you teach, any other thing that you feel is valuable to include, that all is put in your profile. An LEA, a principal, or a district administrator will approve that and basically come to an agreement that that is essentially what will be reflected in the portfolio. All right, we'll spend a little bit of time with step 2. And that's because it's really important. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We're going to ask that during your normal planning and reflection work, that you outline the targeted objectives that you're going to want to include in your portfolio. But it's also important to say that this needs to not be something in addition to what you're already doing. The strength of this model is that it basically allows you to do what you've always done in the past. Use the assessments that you've always done in the past, but do it in a way that kind of helps you think throughout the course of all your classes and be reflective that way. So we're going to basically ask you to align those objectives that you already use to what we call purposeful sampling. And once you align that, then you just teach like you normally would and collect that evidence from 2 points in time. We'll come back to that in just a moment when we talk more about purposeful sampling. And then 3, upload the growth evidence to the online portal as it is collected. You'll get a password to Gladys and a login to a site called Gladys. And we rolled that out. It was created and launched last year for the school districts that were using this model. This is their only work, so they're very responsive to the changes that we might want. So that was given in January last year. It's going to happen much earlier in the school year, so you'll be able to collect all throughout the year and avoid any kind of technical problems that could potentially be out there for last minute kind of work. We also have a separate training video that will help anyone that has problems with technology or problems with a website. We're going to give all the resources that people might need. We have learned a lot of lessons on how to go about collecting this evidence, what formats. Some people were choosing very long video files, and we found that really if it's more than a minute or 2 minutes, then it was really more redundant information. So we've got a lot of recommendations. So you'll see the separate video for that if you need to. A lot of people won't need to. And then a little bit about that 4th step. Self-score your collections using the scoring guide and close your portfolio for review. Now that self-score is really important because that's where you're going to take the scoring guide, which is an extensive document that's based on state standards for every content area, and you're going to look at the level of those indicators to rate your own work, rate your own ability to look at pre and post or post to post, the 2 points in time. How much did the children grow for the objectives that you put out? And that's where you will take that information and you will rate it yourself. Now that doesn't become part of your actual score, but it determines how many other reviewers will see that work and rate that work. For an example, if I put in a collection of evidence and I self-rate that a 5, 5 being the best, and someone else looks at that work and they also rate it, and they don't know who I am, they don't know that I rated it a 5, they're looking at that evidence for the first time, and let's say they also come to the conclusion that it's a level 5 evidence collection. At that point, it's finished. It doesn't go to any more reviewers because the first 2 agree. But if it's more than 1 point away, let's say that the first reviewer gave it a 3. Well, the difference between a 5 and a 3, that something's kind of different there, and we want to make sure that no one score is determined by one person's rating. So at that point, we put in an appeal process, an automatic appeal that sends it to another blind review. And if that first reviewer and the second reviewer come to the same score, then that is what becomes the score. And if they do not agree within 1 point, then it sends it to yet another level of review from a state committee that will make sure that everyone has the most fair shake at this process as possible. So basically the self-score, it just makes sure that you get a fair hearing looking through multiple levels of raters instead of any one person's score. So that's basically the process. And now let's talk a little bit about purposeful sampling. If you are, this is kind of a breaking point, so if you want to pause it and come back later after you discuss a few things, that would be fine. But if not, let's jump in and finish so you can get back to what you were doing and talk about purposeful sampling. All right, there's a lot of people that kind of thought that the fine arts model would be too easy, that teachers shouldn't be allowed to construct their own evidence and represent their own classes. But what we found is that this is a rigorous approach as long as things meet a certain framework. And we've really kind of tightened down this year that framework and made it a lot more clear. And I think for those people that went through the system last year, you'll like the way that it's approached this year. And if this is your first time, you'll see that on page 2 and 3 of your teacher's guide, that there's an example of purposeful sampling, and then a way for you to construct your own portfolio using purposeful sampling that makes things a lot more clear. All right, so what we're basically asking for is 5 total evidence collections, and these will represent all of your classes. And within each one of these 5 collections, it must be 2 points in time, because this is a growth measure, not an achievement measure. We're going to need 3 out of 4 domains. We'll talk a little more about that in a minute. And we're going to be proportionally representative of the teacher's course load. All right, that just means be reasonable about the way you put in the work, that you can't put in all of your evidence from one class or any 2 classes, that it must resemble your overall approach. Even though you may have 7 classes that you teach, we're asking for 5 collections that are somewhat representative of all of those. More training on that in a moment. Also, we're going to ask that you think about as long of time spans as possible, not any kind of beginning of the lesson do the lesson and then post. That's unfair to ask evaluators to look at that kind of rating unless it's completely appropriate for that objective. Okay, so let's get into the actual purposeful sampling, because if you spend a little bit of time here, it saves you a lot of time throughout the rest of the year. So we're going to need all portfolios to contain 5 total evidence collections. Each one of those collections must have data that's pre and post, or from 2 points in time. It could be post to post or pre to pre. We can talk about all that later. But basically 2 points in time of evidence for 5 collections. You'll see here that we have August to April, the evidence 2 points in time. That's pretty self-explanatory, but some people uploaded evidence last year of only 1 point in time, and it ended up kind of hurting their score. All right, now let's kind of talk about the national and state standards. There are some places across the country that are developing paper and pencil tests to measure what kids are knowing and learning and able to do in the arts. And I feel like that's really dangerous, and we don't want to go there. Now, there may be some pencil and paper tests that are appropriate for some of the different domains, and if you feel empowered to use that, then more power to you. But we're saying that you don't have to use that. You can actually go performance-based skills, and that could be the actual majority of your portfolio. So look at the scoring guide, look at your teacher's guide, and you'll see that all of our former national and state standards are broken down into 4 kind of reasonable categories of perform, which is doing the art, doing the skill, create, which is doing the skill but kind of inserting your own creativity as a student into the process, respond, which is more of an intellectual response to what's happening, and connect, which is more of the interdisciplinary connections and connections with the other art forms. Those are the things that all of the standards have in common between media arts, theater, dance, visual arts, and music. They all have those 4 in common, and the overlap can get a little bit confusing, but don't worry too much about that. Consult the scoring guide. Where the scoring guide is confusing, just contact your site administrator, PLC leader, or myself, and we'll get clarity there. Basically, the 4 domains: perform, create, respond, and connect. They're all important. And we're saying by the end of your 5 collections, just hit 3 out of the 4 of them. You can do all 4 if you would like, but we know sometimes it's harder to collect pre and post evidence for, say, the connect domain or the respond domain. So just because you don't include it doesn't mean that you're not teaching. It just means that it was harder to document. So 3 of the 4 domains is what we're after. I want to ask that we talk a little bit about individual evidence collections. Can be multiple domains. You can put in evidence of perform and respond. And really good arts teaching tends to have all the domains represented. But for the purposes of the portfolio, that complicates the scoring, and you have to have a higher threshold because you may only have pre and post evidence of perform, and you've just touched on respond or touched on the others. There just may not be a lot of good evidence of growing kids there according to the scoring guides. So pick your categories carefully in your planning. All right, and the fourth bullet is evidence should be reflective of the teacher's course load. This seems to be a no-brainer. Most people get this one really easily. But if you teach, let's say, for example, kindergarten through 5th grade art, then all of your examples shouldn't be from just one grade. Then you would need to see some of your lower grades, higher grades, and just be reasonable in the way that you do that. If you have a really complicated teaching situation with a lot of multiple preps, multiple schools, and you feel like it's kind of out of the ordinary, you may want to speak with your administrator about making sure your portfolio is kind of well prepared to look at that in a very meaningful way. All right? Moving quickly down to the one that can get a little bit more confusing, but this goes back to our idea of growing all levels of kids. So we're asking that in 2 of your 5 evidence collections that you do what we call type 2 evidence. Also, some of your collections may include group or ensembles. Our performing arts teachers tend to want to gravitate toward large groups, and that's totally fine in this system. But just know that at least 2 of your evidence collections, you're going to have to really look at those subpopulations and identify those that are coming in at 3 different levels and how they're growing pre to post. We'll look at an example of that in just a minute. So the difference basically between type 1 evidence and type 2 is type 2, when you put in the pre and post evidence, you're going to need to identify at least 3 levels of learner pre and 3 for post. And I can tell you, visual art teachers, they tend to exclusively use type 2 evidence. It's easier for them to do their planning, it's easier for them to do their evidence collections, and it's just a lot more clear cut. That gives a little bit more burden to the performing arts teachers, so we're flexible in that 2 of the 5 are type 2, and the others could be a little bit more free to use as you wish. So basically type 1 is evidence without red tape. Not a lot of rules associated with type 1 evidence, except that it must contain 2 points in time. If you feel like you have really great evidence that you're growing kids, then you should be able to include that evidence without a lot of rules and hassle. As long as it has 2 points in time. That's type 1. Type 2, you might show emerging, proficient, and advanced level students and how they're doing pre and post, and ask you to take just a little bit more steps. So, all right, let's get a little bit more explanation of this concept. All right, type 2 evidence. This shows growth for your most advanced students to your middle range to struggling, or what some people are calling emerging, proficient, and advanced. It shows how you target your instruction to meet the needs of all your students, and it typically includes 3 students. And we don't ask that you identify these ahead of time. You just teach all your kids. You identify and differentiate for all your kids, and you collect evidence, not for everyone. Just be smart about the way you collect that evidence. And don't just do 3 students at the beginning, because in a transient population, those students may move away. So remember, this is about teaching all of our kids and collecting things in a real reasonable way. All right, and also you might want to say, some people have this and they're ready to go. Some people really like a lot more training on the difference between type 1 and type 2. So we're going to do essentially another short video for y'all if you want. But if you feel confident and comfortable with this, then you're ready to roll. All right, now let's kind of look at 3 other slides about what this could look like in a situation for visual art. Right. So what we have, the next 3 slides, we're going to look at this type 2 evidence just so you can get an idea of 3 levels of learners. So the next 3 slides show an example of type 2 from a high school visual art class. And while you're looking at these, maybe think about what it might look like in one of your classes. All right, slide 1 of 3. We would have an emerging with a pre or a rough draft to a final. So it takes a student that the teacher has self-identified as someone that might be coming in at emerging level and what they did at 2 points in time. And then looking at the same assignment the same work with maybe a middle level student with 2 different points in time. And then in the third slide, you see that there's more advanced level student with advanced level work coming in pre and post. So basically you have 3 slides with pre and post images to where you end up with 6 images per the whole collection. Now, this is not every child in that class, but it's a purposeful representative sample of type 2 evidence. So for visual art teachers, they tend to do this for all of their collections. They don't have to, but they can, as long as 2 of the 5. And for everyone else, it's really, as long as you go 2 to the 5 as type 2, then you'll be fine. And of course, if you need more help with the concept of sampling, or maybe what some of the examples could look like, then we are going to have an additional training video and PowerPoint for that for you to use on demand. We can use existing sample collections, but I'm going to warn you against looking at anything that anyone did last year because it may be a good example, but I don't want you to feel like that's the threshold or the requirements for doing your own. This is highly customizable, it's highly personalized, so be careful about using other people's examples as a template for what you should do. They're just used for your information as a guide to maybe bring more clarity, but not a prescription. Or you could also contact anyone at your district or at the State Department with this for support. And now we're going to look at another slide. It's actually in your teacher's guide. If you would kind of look at page 2, you will see basically putting the pieces together. This is where you're going to see all of the requirements for purposeful sampling and how if you structure your planning at the beginning of the year, this really could be a piece of cake. And you will see this is an example of an elementary music teacher, teaches kindergarten through 5th grade, and you will look at, this is actually on your 2nd page of your teacher's guide, and on the 3rd page is for something for you to complete for yourself, which you will probably do here in a few minutes. But you see that as far as type 1 and type 2, that collections 3 and 4 are the type 2, and this teacher has chosen to do type 1 for the other 1, 2, and 5 collections. As far as the domains that were represented, she needed to do, or he needed to do 3 of 4 of those domains, and she or he chose perform, respond, perform, perform and connect, and perform. So that was standards based. The thing that was left out of this portfolio was create. And so the children weren't necessarily improvising, composing, or arranging. And that doesn't mean that the teacher wasn't doing it, just that it wasn't included in this portfolio. But still, it's standards based because all of the other collections kind of summed together show that we're teaching toward the standards, not just one of the standards. And we also see that all of these collections have at least 2 points in time. Pre-post, pre, and then documented throughout the year. There was another pre-post. This one was a pre to pre, which kind of takes their baseline skill at one point, measured against a baseline skill of another point of a similar concept. And then a post-post, which essentially looks at a final product of a concept compared to another final product of a concept. A lot of the performing arts teachers like this idea because you're able to look at the final product, let's say of a band performance. And if you're teaching in the legato style and teaching about phrasing and balance and blend, perhaps those are the objectives that you're looking at, and you can do that with a final performance at one point of the year and another final performance of a different piece of music at another point of the year and compare those 2 points in time. So that wouldn't be a pre to post, that would be more like a post to a post. So that's absolutely okay and acceptable as long as there's 2 points in time and you're measuring the same skill as 2 points in time. Of course, you can't compare one skill to a separate skill because you couldn't measure growth that way. So be careful in your planning and contact your team leads for that. The course load represented really easily here, 5th grade recorder ensemble, that was one. An exceptional learner, a single student measured throughout the year, that was another. You don't have to use a single student, but you can as long as it fits in the bigger picture. Kindergarten students from one class, 4th grade students, 2nd grade, so it's the overall course represented. And then under the learning spans, you see that the teacher was very specific on the amount of time that the skill was introduced to the time that it was measured at the end. And sometimes that may be only 6 or 7 classes that you teach, if you're especially in elementary music where you don't see them daily. So you just have to be specific about the amount of time that you have with the children and the skill that you're growing. All right, moving forward, let's talk about how this is actually scored. This is important because you will self-score this in the same way that peer reviewers will score this. All right, so the same basic format applies. We look at the student work pre and the student work post. Look at the scoring guide and you do a baseline measurement of where they fit on that continuum. That doesn't mean that in order to get a 5 that your kids have to be up here at this level 5 work at the highest end of proficiency. On the contrary, it's more about how many levels have grown so they could score just as high moving from a level 1 to a 3 as if they moved from a 3 to a 5. So just the amount of levels grown within that scoring guide, that's the most important. So you measure the pre, you measure the post, and the distance between is the growth that we're looking for, not about achievement, but about the amount of growth. And from that, we make inferences about the amount that the teacher actually put into growing that child. So that's the basic framework of scoring, and what that kind of looks like on the scoring guide is that if you grow someone one level, and this pretty much matches what the state TVOS language is that on average one level of student growth, if you scored a 2 on the pre, a 3 on the post, that would be one level of growth. And from the time a child enters in kindergarten to the time they exit high school, you have essentially 13 years and 13 levels that we expect to grow kids. And as long as you're moving them one level at a time, then it's at expectations. Above expectations, approximately 2 levels of growth, and significantly above, and on and on. So the problem with this scale might become, for some people unfamiliar with our process, is what about our high-level learners? And what about our individual teaching situations? So the benefit of having a portfolio that's reviewed by content-specific trained peers is that they are humans that can take into account many, many complex items to come up with what is a professional judgment rating, and also using the scoring guide. So there's a marriage between the state standards in the scoring guide and professional judgment that comes into play when we're looking at this work. So what about our advanced level students? Well, if there's smaller amounts of growth that can happen, we can get more into detail about this later, but we still expect to see some growth. It may not be numerically measurable, but we still expect to see. A common example we use is that if you're at a very high proficiency level on the pre and a very high proficiency level on the post, the mere fact that they are growing in terms of the level of literature, perhaps it was a grade 2 at one point and a grade 4 at another. They both are very high quality products, but the level of difficulty increased exponentially. Well, then that is significant growth, even though they're both kind of at the high levels of the scoring guide. Evaluators are trained to be thoughtful about different ways that growth can be determined. So another thing that we want to consider is the amount of time that is demonstrated, or that the teaching assignment is challenging. We had a lot of really difficult teaching assignments last year that went through this process, and the teacher scored really, really well. And so we know that it is a personalized system, that the teacher is able to describe their situation and have the evidence viewed within the scope of the amount of time that they see those children and anything else that's important to view. So keep those things in mind as you do your self-score at the end of the process. All right, we won't talk, we're actually wrapping this up pretty quickly, so the end is in sight. You can get back to all the busy things that you do. A little bit about auditing and approval is that this system is very rigorous, but some people have asked about, well, how do we make sure that it's a system with integrity? And we know that the school district has an administrator that approves any changes that are made in your teaching context, and there are 3 levels of audits that you need to be aware of, or that others need to be aware of. Basically is that there are random audits that the student works that are submitted would be viewed by a district administrator and the teacher, just to be clear. That happens randomly across the state. And we also have 2 other types of audits where the peer reviewers might see something suspicious and need to have it cleared before the score can be counted. And also a district administrator, if they really need to see a little bit more about the contents of that portfolio. Those can all be used to make sure the system is a very integrity-based system. Just worth mentioning. All right, again, we have an online platform. The Tennessee 3.0 uses the Gladys system, and it's been upgraded to make a very smooth flow of data between the reviewer and the teacher. And we have a lot of on-demand videos that, for some people, the thought of sitting through an hour-long training like this is so excruciating, and so I'll try to be more entertaining. But so we don't want you to have to sit through additional trainings that you don't need. So for those people that need help, more help with the technology, we will absolutely committed to provide that. All right, so where are we now? We have at least 16 districts throughout the state of Tennessee that are using the system. We know that at least 4 other states have adopted this in pilot or full scale. So the idea that teachers can create the evidence with the students that they teach and can be trusted to be the only ones evaluating that work, that's a major step forward for arts education. And we know that the movement for this concept created by Tennessee arts teachers is actually spreading out to other discipline areas as well. For example, world languages and some areas of social studies and physical education. So we're really happy that Tennessee educators are really coming together to know the role that the arts play, and now they're tested subject, but on their terms. So what's next? We know that our commitment to you is that we're always here available for support, that we're going to host monthly webinars that you can choose to get on and learn, or you could be happy not to do that. Basically, if you need it, we're here for you. Also, we have a peer review applications that's coming out from the State Department. We encourage everyone to apply to become a peer reviewer. That is a content-specific only. Dance teachers will look at dance teachers' work, theater to theater, so on and so forth, by grade level. We commit to give you a lot of electronic resources and in-person resources and be very responsive to your needs as we move forward. So final slide, I promise, is that we're really super excited that this process puts teachers at the center of the evaluation process as the ones who are trusted to gain and collect all this evidence, and also those who are doing the measuring. So in closing, I just encourage you to do proper planning on the front end so this doesn't monopolize your time throughout the school year. We are very sensitive to how busy everyone is, and in no time do we want this to become a burden that would stop you from teaching, or that would put on additional things that would make it more difficult to teach. We've heard from the field that a lot of teachers, that this elevated their planning game, and this actually made them a better teacher, and for that we are really happy. And we just encourage you to not stress about it, and don't spend too much time. Spend the right amount of time. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're putting more time than you think you should, contact one of your administrators that can help you maybe rethink your scoring guide. So in closing, look at your teacher's guide, look at the second and third page, review all the frequently asked questions, and fill out your own planning guide so that you can start the year knowing exactly how each collection will fit in. And the last word that I will have is to be very targeted in your objectives. So don't think about maybe your activities that you used to do in isolation, but think about what is the skill that you're actually trying to grow, and target in on those objectives, and you'll have a much better experience. And we think that we will see a lot of growth across the state of Tennessee that we haven't seen in years. And we're just really excited about the process. My name is Drew Davison, and you can reach me at drewdavison@gmail.com, drudavison@gmail.com. Thanks today.